Hey guys, Xlice here. With 4.1 arriving, we can finally take a step back from the elation and remembrance chill, and take a comfortable trip with Ashveil to revisit our old friend back in Fua Town. If you're a Feixiao main, or just want to enjoy some old school classic comps, or want to enjoy some Ashveil aura farming, this guy is a great addition to the follow-up squad as either a main or sub-DPS. In this video, I'll explain everything you need to know about what Ashveil does, how to play, how to build, how to team, how to Ashveil. Disclaimer, all things filmed are on Creator Experience Server and subject to change for release, keep that in mind. Let's get into it. So, if you're familiar with characters like Moze or Topaz, Ashveil is basically the same design, just stronger. We are going to be applying a mark to an enemy and deal constant follow-up damage to that enemy whenever an ally attacks them. Ashveil's mark is this eyeball thing and labels the target bait. This mark can be applied in the following ways. Automatically on the lowest target by default. This will happen at the beginning of the fight, which does not require skill points. Normally, techniques do this, but for Ashveil, he actually has it built into his skill. His technique is for a minor different thing. He can also do it manually through his skill or manually through his ultimate. Because it's automatically applied to the lowest enemy, he typically just targets that enemy until it's dead and then moves on to the next lowest HP target. Obviously, in combat this may not be ideal, but it's set up in a way that prioritizes the weakest link. When Ashveil uses his skill on an already baited enemy, he recovers 1 skill point, making that skill effectively cost 0. And while a target is marked with bait, all enemies have 40% def reduction. Then, his actual follow-up attacks are pretty standard. His tooltip will show you how many Fua are left, and he recharges every time he ults. At the beginning of combat, he'll start with 2 charges, and also gain 1 with the technique for a total of 3. His technique's only use is for this extra charge, since his skill already applies his bait mark automatically. So on top of his ult granting 3 charges, it also does his largest source of single target damage. He'll first mark the target with bait if not already, in the case where you decide to switch targets, then deals multiple instances of damage, which include using his own follow-up attack. And if he has stacks of what are called gluttony, he'll do additional follow-up instances to the target. Gluttony is not shown on his tooltip, but rather under the other effects on the buff page. He'll gain them naturally through his skill, ult, or follow-up attacks landing, and it stacks up to 12 times. Each stack of his gluttony, besides giving his ult more hits, will also grant him extra follow-up damage, 10% per stack up to 120%. It's also important to note that he consumes these gluttony stacks, so it will technically be kind of reset after he uses his ultimate. Now, when it comes to his ult uptime, you don't have to worry too much, because he gains 8 fixed energy every time the bait is attacked by another ally, which ends up adding over time and giving him relatively secure ult uptime. Even if he does not have any more follow-up charges, if bait is attacked, he will still gain that 8 energy. But yeah, his gameplay is basically perma-spam skill on bait targets, making sure you have at least 1 SP so it refunds it, and then ulting whenever you feel necessary to reset his charges. Remember that while his skill is technically 0 cost SP, it does still need 1 skill point to use initially. So overall, I find this kit to be pretty straightforward. The game will mark the targets for you immediately upon you enter battle, and then he automatically does these follow-up attacks to them when they are attacked by other allies, and then more abilities and attacks that he uses means more gluttony stacks, which means stronger follow-up attack damage and stronger ultimates. He can be viewed as either a main follow-up attack DPS or a sub-DPS depending on the situation, and fits both roles pretty well without requiring major changes to his build. Now for extra passive benefits. So A2 Trace has the gluttony details that I mentioned. Skill 1 stack, ult 2 stacks, follow-up attack 2 stacks. A4 Trace grants him 80% attack for follow-up attacks, and up to 120% follow-up damage dealt. A6 Trace grants universal 40% team-wide crit damage, and then an extra 80% follow-up attack crit damage. So the follow-up attacks get a combined 120% crit damage bonus from this trace. Trace Nose gives 37.3 crit damage, 10% attack, and 14.4 lightning damage bonus. So he's really got insane built-in crit damage, but basically no crit rate. So we will prioritize crit rate on his light cone and relics. For trace priority, skill is going to be first priority for the maximum def reduction. Then I'm going to do talent and ultimate for the damage multipliers, and then basic as needed. His def reduction is the most important thing to scale in his traces, as everything else is just the damage multiplier. For main DPS, make sure to invest in talent and ult. Basic can still be left alone, since as long as you have 1 SP, he will always be able to use his skill on marked targets. Now let's take a look at his light cones. Since he follows the hunt path, we actually have a huge variety of options. For his signature, it provides 18% crit rate, 40% attack, and 20% vulnerability percent to all enemies. The main unique value from this is the 20% vulnerability, and the crit rate and attack total to 76% additional stat. Other options include the following. Dr. Ratio's Baptism of Pure Thought will be second best, providing 20% crit damage, another 24% crit damage, 36% damage dealt, and 24% ignore defense. This does not have crit rate on it, which means you will need to rely on massive crit rate from relics and team setups, but as you guys can see, the amount of stat this has is quite impressive. This is totaling to 80% stat and 24% ignore defense. Now, if you do have Sparkle to increase your SP limit, Archer's Light Cone becomes an 80% attack stat stick and 60% crit rate boost, providing 112% just raw stat. Topaz is also not bad, comes in at 18% crit rate, 30% follow-up attack damage, 24% crit damage for a total of 90% stat. And then finally, the free Stellar C from R1 to R5 clocks in at 8 to 16% crit rate, another 8 to 16% crit rate if enemies are less than 50% HP, and then 20 to 40% attack. All the other hunt options aren't nearly as strong, providing less cumulative stat than the ones that I just mentioned. Stellar C will be the truly best free-to-play option, but the awkward crit rate uptime means it's potentially annoying to build around. Now running through relics. So we're going back to the old classic 4-piece Grand Duke. This grants maximum follow-up attack value to Ashveil with his high hit count follow-up attacks. Second best option will be the 4-piece Pioneer set for general crit and damage dealt bonuses, but since the 4-piece Duke is an older set, it should be fairly easy to have like a half build or a full build to get up and running. Of course, if we do end up with a full sub-DPS Ashveil, then 4-piece Eagle is always an option. As is the case with recent 4-piece Eagle users, our goal in that case would just be to cycles ultimates for maximum follow-up charges. For planners, 2-piece Converging Stars will be his best tailor-made set, granting a hybrid 24% attack to himself and 12% crit damage to all allies for the rest of battle. However, he does have a massive amount of alternative sets, so you can consider any of the following if the new one is not your fancy. 2-piece Durin. This grants a total of 25% damage bonus and 25% crit damage at max stacks, for a total of 50% stat. We also have 2-piece Banana for 48% total crit damage, but will require DHPT as a teammate. And then we have an old classic 2-piece Sao Soto for 8% crit rate and 15% follow-up damage for 31% total stat. And then finally, a little bit less common, 2-piece Azumo for dual hunt teams for 12% attack and 12% crit rate for 36% total stat. Overall though, I would personally try to farm for this 2-piece Converging Stars, since the 12% ally crit damage is nice extra juice to have for at least one member of the party. For main stats, we're running a standard crit rate body, speed or attack boots, damage or attack orb, and attack or ERR rope. He's got an insane 120% plus crit damage steroid in his kit, so we're almost always going crit rate body here. For boots, the game has progressed to the point where speed is the default because we have so many external buffs provided from teammates, relics, light cones, and game mechanics, and also to synergize around action advanced supports. I personally will prefer speed, but attack will also be fine. If running sub-DPS though, speed is advisable. And then for the orb, generally damage percent is best, but attack is not too far behind nowadays because again, we have so many like damage percent bonuses and attack percent bonuses that the total stat is pretty high for both sides. And then for the rope, most builds will run attack percent. ERR is for the future case where he's just like Kafka, running 4-piece Eagle with ERR rope and 1 to 2 turn ulting for maximum follow-up charges. His passive that grants 8 fixed energy does not scale with ERR, so this ERR rope will only be benefiting his own in-combat abilities. When you got a full build, this is what you can approximately expect. 2.5k attack, a decent amount of speed, 100% or close to crit rate in combat, depends on team buffs, and as much crit damage as possible. As a hunt character, he's pretty standard build path, so nothing crazy here to see. Now, a quick breakdown of his Eidolons for those interested. Feel free to skip forward for combat demonstrations. So, E1. When Ashveil is on field, 24% vulnerability percent for all enemies, increased to 36% for enemies below 50% HP. On average, you'll get around 32%, which is pretty strong universal E1 that's beneficial as a main or sub-DPS. E2. Gluttony max stacks increase from 12 to 18, and he refunds 35% of the removed stacks when his ult uses an enhanced follow-up attack. Now this makes his ult hit a good chunk harder and also passively boosts his A4 trace bonus to provide up to 180% follow-up damage bonus instead of 120%. E4, using his ult gives him 40% attack for 3 turns. And finally, E6. While bait is on field, all enemies have 20% res reduction. And then, for each stack of Gluttony that Ashveil has gained throughout the whole fight, increases his damage dealt by 4%, stacking up to 30 times. So this is going to be separate than the actual stacks that he uses during his ult. This is a ramping permanent bonus that caps 30 times. Overall, his Eidolons are a mix between team buffs and self buffs. E1 is a pretty solid early investment for general team DPS. E2 and E4 are personal buffs, and E6 is a hybrid but mostly personal damage buff. Now, I don't see his Eidolon scaling a crazy amount on his damage, but if E6 is a separate multiplier, it might actually scale to over double damage for his follow-up attacks. Alright, so now let's see how he performs in combat. So I view Ashveil as a premium follow-up support now, and basically pushes Moze and Topaz out of the meta. For team comps, we have two archetypes. One for main DPS, because his personal damage is really good, and one for sub-DPS. So main DPS Ashveil will be paired with an action advancer, like Sunday, RMC, or Sparkle, and a flex support unit, like Tribbie, Cypher, or Silverwolf, and then DHPT for our sustain. Now, I personally prefer using a Tribbie as our flex unit support because her aura buffs are too useful and her follow-up attack count is especially high. Sub-DPS Ashveil will be paired with most commonly Feixiao as main DPS, and then also Tribbie and DHPT. Tribbie here is again too useful to have due to being guaranteed SP positive and double aura buffing Feixiao and Ashveil. DHPT is our irreplaceable attack sustain for both of these comps that also has good follow-up attack count. So these two setups that you guys see here are what I've opted to showcase. We got main DPS Ashveil and then sub DPS Ashveil. All 5 stars shown here are E0S1 and Tribbie is on signature. Using her on DDD may yield different results and maybe even slightly better results. For me, I just autopiloted her signature, so yeah. Now, unfortunately, our boss for MLC demonstration will be the Giver, and he prefers more AoE-centric comps to smash through the spears. However, our comp is single target, but we're still going to work through it with these team comps. So, first up, this is a 1-cycle main DPS Ashveil. So, we're going to set up like normal here and get Tribbie's ult as soon as possible. For the most part, you guys will just see that Ashveil essentially plays himself. The only min-maxing that we really need to do is ult choice. So you'll see that the enemies will always have bait already on field, and for most of these trash waves, bait is actually on this trash mob to the left. You can't switch it until he has his own turn and uses his skill or ultimate, or he has enough energy to use his ult. So we're just gonna try to blast him as much as possible, because as long as we attack that purple eyeballed enemy, Ashveil gets 8 fixed energy, which is really nice. Alright, so we're gonna switch targets here. We're gonna go into the middle guy. The reason why I do this is because we have enough chip damage on the rest of our units to be able to kill that last unit, or kill the left unit with residual damage. So now we have our mem buff on Ashveil. He's just going to skill all the time. You'll see that we do use 1 skill point, but it is recovered because we are attacking bait. Alright, so the small enemy's dead. This one's almost dead. And just to remind you guys that Ashveil is on 0% energy. His ultimate generation is really, really good with his passive. Honestly, kind of broken. Alright, so we do want to make sure, you guys can see here, this is the last action before zero cycling this wave. So I'm going to send an ult here just to make sure we have the damage. And also, we can send an ultimate here to guarantee that we have 1 extra follow-up from Ashveil. So all this damage is going to contribute to a 0-cycle wave 1. Alright, so now battle 2. So I am going to prioritize dealing with the As that are summoned. Since we are a single target composition, and killing all the spears, it does deal damage to the main boss. That is our preferred motion, especially because the way that Ashveil's ult works, which you will soon see, is that he will reprioritize other small enemies after that one's dead, so he doesn't waste damage. Alright, so we're waiting patiently here. Alright, so he sucks our souls, got the spears up, now we send our AoE. Alright, so Tribbie ultimate to refresh those follow-up attacks. Then we're going to choose any one of these spears. So I just go to the all the way right one. We send an ultimate here, and now we start. This ultimate is going to proc Tribbie, who is going to proc Ashveil. And now Tribbie's turn, we're just going to do some blast damage. So you guys can see, 1 ultimate, we kill 2 spears, which significantly chunks the boss HP. Alright, same thing. Keep going. Almost done with all the spears. Guys can see we have not targeted main boss really this entire fight. It's just all residual damage and also from the spirit destructions. Alright, so E this guy. First cycle's done. Okay, so he's phasing here. I really want to wait on this ultimate. We're going to wait on everything until he summons the spears again, which he does now. Alright, now we're in a full send. So we want to switch bait target first. Once we do that, then we ultimate with RMC. So really nice. So one spear's dead. Now we do this. This will trigger a follow-up attack on that baited enemy. So we do this in this particular order because we get to kill the spears faster. And then again, we have Tribbie's ultimate, and Ashveil is still ascending as many follow-up attacks as he can. Alright, now we get an excellent action advance from RMC here. He's almost got his ultimate ready. You guys just saw that we just used ultimate, then we killed a bunch of stuff. Now he's almost done. So this is the beauty of the follow-up attack spam. Ashveil gets so much free energy from all those attacks. So now we're just going to send it. Because even if we kill the left spear, the damage will be transferred to main boss. So watch this. There we go. So 2 extra attacks there. Boom, another chunk of damage. And 27% on phase 2. We got 2 charges of follow-up attack here. We're just going to full send. So this is a pretty, I would say this is a pretty safe clear. It abuses Ashveil's intense amount of energy that he gets and continuously uses his ultimate to refresh those follow-up attacks. And they kind of do this kind of like proc session where Ashveil will proc ultimate, then Tribbie will do passive, and then that passive will proc Ashveil's follow-up attack. So all of this just adds up to an insane amount of damage. Alright, there it is. So that is a pretty clean 1 cycle for this comp. So we're going to switch gears over to Sub-DPS showcase. This one is a little bit unfortunate, and I'm going to explain why. We have another single target showcase here because we have Feixiao and Ashveil, so we're going to have some problems. This is actually a barely missed 1 cycle. It's actually a 2 cycle clear. So the reason why is because E0 S1 Feixiao, unfortunately, the damage output is just not quite up there. And the reality is that RMC's true damage bonus buff to Ashveil is significantly valuable because Ashveil's doing so much of the damage. So you'll see here, because we have a dual DPS composition, this is ideal when you already have a Feixiao that is like heavily invested. Otherwise, she is essentially just going to steal away those RMC stuff, which ends up not benefiting you that much. But we're still going to play it out. I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. There's also a unfortunate downside, as you guys will see. I'm going to go ahead and speed up the first wave because for the most part, it's a 0 cycle first wave. As you guys can see, this is a pretty clean 0 cycle. Now, one of the major downsides for phase 2 also is the fact that we do not have wind weakness. So Feixiao is just not doing as much damage. That's just the reality of it. It does have lightning weakness, which means that Ashveil's getting a lot of value. But yeah, you guys can see here that Feixiao's damage is just not hitting as hard as we would like her to. We're still doing the same strategy. We're still focusing the spears because we really don't do much damage to main boss. So we want to kill all the spears, and that in turn deals a nice amount of chip damage to main boss. But as you guys can see, because we don't have RMC's buff on Ashveil and we don't have enough chip damage on the other side, and Feixiao's ultimate cannot transfer even if it overkills, so we have to be very precise here. In all these situations, I am ulting with Feixiao when I see that these spears have like above 60% HP. I don't want to waste too much damage here because if I do waste the damage, it overkills and then it's just not useful. Yeah. As you guys can see, there's a lot of downsides to this running this comp. We don't have action advance from RMC, which means that our carry, which in this case is probably actually Ashveil, can't deal with this as fast as we would like. And Feixiao is just trying her best. So to give you guys full transparency, I did multiple runs with Ashveil. I tried him on ER rope here as Sub-DPS and see if it was better. I tried him on attack rope. I tuned him a little bit on terms of speed. But overall, nothing really gave me a clear answer to one cycling this in the same way the other comp. So this is essentially what we've got. But yeah, so just so you guys can see, we are on the last cycle for a 1 cycle clear, and we are just at 100%. So it's really unfortunate. Never mind. Okay, I thought that we missed the blessing damage, but I did save the blessing damage to get as much damage as possible. Ideally, we would want to be on phase 2 at the start for this blessing to do a lot of damage. But yeah. All right, so I'm gonna fast forward a little bit just to show you guys, because this is basically the same stuff. For the most part, you guys are just gonna see that Feixiao is gonna try to ult each of the spears, and yeah. Also on wave 1, I did try to save Feixiao's ult charges, but we were risking not being able to 0 cycle that. But yeah. Alright, so as you guys can see, it is really close, right? You guys see the HP is super, super close. We have 10% left, but unfortunately we have no other abilities active. We don't have any ultimates, we don't have any follow-up attacks from Ashveil. We're too far away from getting the energy from him as well. The only thing we can do with DHPT is auto and then ult at max, but that won't give enough for Ashveil. If, for example, Ashveil had a little bit more energy here from various RNG sources, then we would have been fine. Again, this is on attack rope. If you were ER rope, it would perform worse because we don't have enough damage, right? Running attack rope versus ER rope means that all of his damage is a lot stronger. Running ER rope would give him ult here, but we wouldn't be at 10%. We would be at like 30 to 40% of the boss HP left. So the sad truth is that we are not able to 1 cycle here. It is relying on the blessing, but it is what it is. That's how it works. There it is. So, what do you think? Closing thoughts overall, Ashveil is an aura farmer, a premium follow-up attack sub-DPS, or main DPS. Lots of built-in quality of life in his kit make him wildly enhanced compared to older characters, most notably a 0 effective cost skill and insane amounts of free energy for his ultimate. If you enjoy follow-up attack teams, he's definitely a must pick up. Good buffs, good damage, and good debuffs for enemies. Of course, if you're concerned about the shield mechanics, you have every right to be. Ashveil is the lone hunt character in a sea of elation, so it's difficult to see where follow-up teams go from here. Let me know in the comments what you think, and don't forget to like and subscribe for future releases and gacha summon videos. If I do end up making an E0 to E6 Ashveil showcase, that will be released on my second channel. Thanks for watching, and take care.